She lived as a servant for 7 years to conceal her Omega blood until the Alpha King found out. Most stories about Omegas begin with submission, but Silara's story began with defiance, a dangerous, calculated defiance that required her to bury everything she was beneath 7 years of lies. Not because she was weak, but because in the kingdom of Drakmor, Omega blood wasn't just rare. It was hunted, harvested, and sold to the highest bidder. She had been a servant in the Shadowmere Palace for exactly 7 years. Long enough for the other servants to stop questioning her sudden, violent illness every full moon. Long enough for the suppressant herbs she consumed daily to permanently scar her throat. Long enough to almost believe she truly was Lyra, a nobody from the northern wastes with beta blood and forgettable features. Almost. The Alpha King's return changed everything. Silara sensed him before she saw him, a presence that made every carefully constructed wall around her true nature tremble. She pressed herself against the stone corridor, balancing the silver tray of moon wine against her hip as his entourage swept through the palace gates. Throughout his previous campaigns, she'd managed perfect timing, absent when he returned, invisible when he stayed. But tonight, with half the serving staff struck by winter fever and the head steward's suspicious eyes tracking her every movement, escape wasn't an option. The great hall blazed with 1,000 candles, their light catching on the obsidian pillars that gave Shadowmere its name. Nobles dressed in midnight silks and blood-red velvets filled every corner, their excited whispers creating a symphony of anticipation. At the far end of the hall, upon a throne carved from a single block of volcanic glass, he sat. Alpha King K. Shadowthorn. Even from across the vast hall, his presence dominated the space. Not through ostentatious display, he wore simple black leather and iron, no crown upon his dark hair, but through something far more primal, raw, undiluted alpha power that made lesser wolves bare their throats in submission. His eyes, the color of molten silver in the candlelight, swept across the assembled crowd with the lazy confidence of an apex predator. Would he recognize what she was? Could an Alpha King's heightened senses pierce through years of suppressance and deception? "You there, girl with the moon wine." The head steward's sharp voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "His Majesty requires refreshment." Silara's fingers tightened on the tray. The silver burned against her palms. Another price of the suppressants. They dulled her Omega nature, but also weakened her body's natural healing. Every cut lasted weeks. Every bruise painted her skin in purple and gold. The other servants whispered she had weak blood. If only they knew the truth. She wove through the crowd, each step measured and deliberate. Beta servants were invisible, furniture with pulses. She had perfected the art of being overlooked, of moving through spaces without disturbing the air. But tonight, something was different. The closer she drew to the throne, the more her suppressed nature fought against its chains. Her inner wolf, silent for so long she'd almost forgotten its voice, stirred. "No," she commanded it silently. "Not now. Not after everything we've sacrificed." She reached the platform where the Alpha King held court, surrounded by his advisors and the kingdom's most powerful lords. Among them stood Lord Morvethus, the trade minister whose pale eyes tracked her approach with unsettling interest. He was new to court, having arrived just 3 moons ago, but already his influence spread like poison through the noble houses. Behind him, she noticed Lord Dravenor, the war minister, whose harsh treatment of servants was legendary. Both men watched her with different kinds of hunger. "Your Majesty?" she murmured, dropping into a perfect curtsy while balancing the tray. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, not just from protocol, but from necessity. Eye contact with an Alpha King could trigger reactions her suppressants might not contain. "Leave it!" Caelorin commanded, his deep voice rolling through her like distant thunder. She set the goblet on the small table beside his throne, preparing to retreat. But as she straightened, her sleeve caught on the table's edge, pulling back to reveal her wrist. The scars there, thin, deliberate lines where she'd drawn blood for the monthly suppressant ritual, gleamed silver in the light. Time seemed to stop. Caelorin's hand shot out, catching her wrist before she could pull away. His touch burned through her like lightning, and for one terrifying moment, her carefully maintained walls cracked. Her Omega nature surged toward him, recognizing what her mind desperately tried to deny. Alpha. Strong. Protector. Mate. "These scars," he said quietly, his thumb tracing one silver line. "They're fresh." The entire court seemed to hold its breath. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, caught between the instinct to submit and the necessity to flee. Why wouldn't he release her? Any second now, he'd realize what she was, what she'd been hiding. "Your Majesty?" Lord Morvethus interjected smoothly. "The northern treaties require your immediate attention." Caelorin's grip loosened, and Silara snatched her hand back, pulling her sleeve down. She didn't run. Running would draw attention. But she retreated with every ounce of control she possessed. It wasn't until she reached the servants' corridor that she allowed herself to collapse against the wall, heart hammering against her ribs. That touch, that single burning touch, had awakened something she'd kept dormant. Her suppressants were failing. The herbs that had kept her Omega nature hidden were losing their power against something far stronger, the presence of her mate. Number she refused to accept it, refused to believe that after everything she'd survived, fate would be so cruel as to make her true mate the one person she could never have. The Alpha King didn't just claim Omegas. He collected them for the kingdom's breeding programs. Every Omega in Drakmor was registered, tagged, and assigned to strengthen bloodlines. She'd watched it happen to others, witnessed the hollow eyes of Omegas forced into marriages with Alphas they didn't choose, their children taken to be raised by the state. That's why she'd hidden. That's why she'd endured this agony, to avoid becoming another casualty of Drakmor's obsession with bloodline purity. But as she stood in that dark corridor, sleeve pulled back to stare at the scars Caelorin had touched, she wondered if she'd simply traded one cage for another. The sound of footsteps made her straighten. Another servant hurried past, barely sparing her a glance. She had to move, had to return to her duties before someone noticed her absence. But as she pushed away from the wall, a wave of dizziness struck. The room spun, her vision blurring at the edges. The suppressants weren't just failing. They were killing her. Her body, pushed beyond its limits, was finally rebelling against chemical chains. She had maybe weeks, possibly days, before the suppressants stopped working entirely. Before her Omega nature burst free in a revelation that would destroy everything she'd built. She needed to run, tonight. Take what little she'd saved and disappear into the wastelands before. Curious. The voice came from directly behind her. She spun, heart leaping to her throat. Lord Morvethus stood in the shadows, his pale eyes gleaming with predatory interest. Very curious indeed, he continued, stepping closer. A servant with silver scars. Do you know what causes scars to turn silver, little one? She shook her head, taking a step back. He followed, matching her retreat with elegant advances. Magic, he whispered. Old magic, blood magic, the kind that leaves traces even the strongest suppressants can't hide. Ice flooded her veins. He knew. Somehow, this stranger knew what she was. But how? Unless he'd been specifically looking for hidden Omegas. Unless he'd known she would be here. What do you want? The question escaped before she could stop it. His smile was sharp as winter wind. The question, my dear, is what are you willing to sacrifice to keep your secret? Because I assure you, the Alpha King's interest in you tonight was not coincidental. He senses something different about you. How long before that legendary intuition of his pieces together the truth? She remained silent, mind racing through possibilities. Morvethus moved closer still, until she could smell the bitter herbs on his breath, wolfsbane, and something else, something that made her inner wolf recoil. I could help you, he offered. Ensure your secret remains hidden. All I ask in return is one small favor. What kind of favor would a trade minister want from a servant? Unless he knew not just what she was, but who she had been before. The thought sent fresh terror through her. I need time to consider, she managed. Time is a luxury you don't have. He pulled something from his coat, a vial of clear liquid that seemed to pulse with inner light. Concentrated suppressant, 50 times more powerful than the swill you've been choking down. One drop will hide your nature completely for a full moon cycle. Her eyes locked on the vial with desperate hunger. A full month of safety, of invisibility, of freedom from the constant fear of discovery. And in exchange, there's something in the king's private study, a journal bound in white leather. I need you to retrieve it. Theft from the Alpha King. The punishment was death by slow torture. But what choice did she have? Without stronger suppressants, she'd be discovered within days. Either path led to destruction. At least this one offered a chance at escape. Before she could respond, the great bell of Shadowmere began to toll. Midnight. The king would retire soon, and all servants would be required for the evening rituals. Morvethus pressed the vial into her hand. Consider it a gesture of good faith. We'll speak again tomorrow night. Then he was gone, melting back into the shadows as if he'd never existed. Silara stared at the vial in her palm. Such a small thing to hold such massive consequences. 1 drop, he'd said. 1 drop for a month of freedom. Or one more link in an ever-lengthening chain. As she tucked the vial into her hidden pocket and hurried back toward the great hall, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a bargain with something far more dangerous than discovery. But what haunted her most wasn't Morvethus's knowing smile or his impossible offer. It was the memory of Kay Lauren's touch and the terrifying certainty that somehow, impossibly, the Alpha King's wolf had recognized hers. The vial of concentrated suppressant sat untouched in Silara's hidden pocket for 3 days. Every time she reached for it, instinct stopped her. Not conscience, but survival. 7 years of hiding had taught her that gifts from strangers always carried hidden thorns. Instead, she doubled her dose of regular suppressants, bitter herbs that left her throat raw and her wolf whimpering. The side effects were getting worse. This morning, she'd coughed blood into her washing basin, quickly rinsing it away before her roommate awoke. How much longer could her body endure this self-imposed prison? The answer came sooner than expected. "You, servant girl!" Silara froze mid-step, arms full of fresh linens for the guest chambers. The voice belonged to Lady Valora, the king's austere mother who'd arrived yesterday from the winter fortress. The older woman stood in the corridor like a statue carved from ice and disappointment, her silver hair drawn back so severely it pulled at her temples. "Your name?" Valora demanded. "Lyra, your grace!" The lie came automatically now, smoother than truth. Valora's nostrils flared slightly, a wolf scenting the air. "You smell wrong." Every muscle in Silara's body locked. Had she finally been discovered? Would it be the Queen Mother who unveiled her deception? "The suppressant herbs, Your Grace," she managed, keeping her voice steady. "For my monthly ailments. The healer says they affect my scent." Valora's eyes, the same molten silver as her son's, narrowed to slits. "What healer?" "Old Thurenia, in the lower district." A lie wrapped in truth. Thurenia did exist, did provide herbs to servants, but had never treated Lyra because Lyra didn't exist. Still, it was a name Valora could verify, lending credibility to the deception. "My son has mentioned you," Valora said suddenly, circling Silara like a wolf evaluating prey. 3 times in as many days. He never notices servants. What could she say to that? Admitting the king's attention would invite scrutiny. Denying it would be calling the Queen Mother a liar. Silence seemed safest, but even that carried risks. "He asked about your scars," Valora continued. "Said they troubled him. Why would servant scars trouble an Alpha King?" "I couldn't say, Your Grace." "Couldn't or won't?" Before Silara could respond, heavy footsteps echoed from the main corridor. Not the measured pace of guards or the shuffle of servants, but something more purposeful, dangerous. Kailarine rounded the corner, and the very air seemed to shift. He wore training leathers, sweat still gleaming on his exposed arms from the morning's combat practice. His presence filled the narrow corridor, making it suddenly difficult to breathe. "Mother!" His voice carried a warning she chose to ignore. "We were just discussing your peculiar interest in this servant," Valora said smoothly. 3 mentions in 3 days. Should I be planning a bonding ceremony?" The words were said in jest, but they landed like stones in still water, creating ripples neither could contain. Kaelurine's jaw tightened, his eyes flickering to Silara with an intensity that made her suppressants burn in her veins. "Return to your duties," he commanded her, though his gaze never left his mother. Silara didn't need to be told twice. She fled down the corridor, linens clutched against her chest, but not before she heard Valora's parting words. "She's hiding something, my son, and you know it." That evening, Solara found herself assigned to the king's private dining chamber, a duty she'd specifically avoided throughout her years here. The head steward's orders had been clear. The king had requested her personally. To refuse would raise questions she couldn't answer. The chamber was smaller than she'd expected, intimate rather than grand. A single table near windows that overlooked the Shadowlands, those twisted forests where even alphas feared to tread. Kylorin sat alone, wine untouched, staring into the gathering darkness. "Your Majesty." She set the covered dishes on the table, proud when her hands didn't shake. "Sit!" The command froze her mid-turn. "Your Majesty?" "I said sit." He gestured to the chair across from him. "That's an order, not a request." Servants didn't share tables with kings. It violated every protocol, every social boundary that kept their worlds separate. But refusing a direct order from the Alpha King carried its own consequences. Slowly, she lowered herself into the chair, perched on its very edge as if ready to flee. "Remove your gloves." Her heart stuttered. The gloves hid more scars, evidence of her monthly blood rituals. "Your Majesty, Lyra." The false name on his lips made her flinch. "That's what they call you, isn't it? Lyra from the northern wastes. No family name, no pack affiliation, no history before you arrived here." Each word landed like a precisely aimed arrow. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to be dangerous. "I was orphaned young, Your Majesty. The North doesn't keep careful records. The North doesn't produce servants who smell like moon-blessed silver either." He leaned forward, and she caught his scent. Pine and iron, and something wild that made her Omega nature claw at its chemical cage. "Every time you enter a room, my wolf goes silent. Not calm, silent, as if it's holding its breath." Why? How could she explain that Alpha and Omega wolves recognized each other at levels beyond conscious thought? That his wolf sensed hers despite every suppressant she consumed? The truth would condemn her to a breeding program, but lies were becoming harder to maintain. "I don't know, Your Majesty." Another lie. He stood abruptly, moving to the window. "Do you know what the punishment is for lying to your king? Death. Then you're either very brave or very desperate. Which is it?" "Both. Neither." She was just tired. So unbearably tired of hiding, of pretending, of swallowing poison to maintain a facade that grew thinner each day. What would happen if she simply told the truth? Would he drag her to the breeding centers immediately? Or would there be a moment, just one moment, where she could simply exist as herself? "There's a traitor in my court," Kylorin said suddenly, the change of subject so jarring she almost gasped. "Someone feeding information to the Warlands. 3 shipments of weapons have been intercepted. Patrol routes leaked. Guard rotations compromised." Why was he telling her this? Servants weren't privy to military secrets. "Lord Morvethus believes it's someone in the inner circle," he continued. "Someone with access to my private study. Lord Dravener suspects the servants. Both are eager to find a scapegoat." The blood in her veins turned to ice. Morvithus wanted her to steal from that very study. Was this a test? Had the trade minister already betrayed her to the king? And Dravenor, his suspicion of servants was well known, often brutal. But I think the traitor is closer than that. Caelorn turned from the window, his eyes capturing hers. I think someone is being coerced, blackmailed, someone with secrets they're desperate to protect. He moved toward her with predatory grace, each step deliberate. She remained frozen, caught between terror and something else, something that whispered of safety in his presence, even as logic screamed danger. If such a person existed, he said softly, now close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. If someone was being forced to betray their king to protect themselves, what would you advise them to do? Trust him, her Omega nature whispered. Tell him everything. Run, her rational mind countered. Run before it's too late. I would advise them to consider whether their secret is worth more than their soul, she whispered. And if their secret could destroy everything they've built? Everyone they've protected? Protected? An interesting choice of words. Did he know about her past? About the family she'd failed to save? Then they're already destroyed, Your Majesty. They just haven't admitted it yet. He studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his silver eyes. Then he returned to his seat, the moment shattered. Eat, he commanded, gesturing to the untouched food. Servants don't. Tonight, you're not a servant. Tonight, you're my guest. Eat. The meal passed in charged silence. She took small bites, hyper-aware of his attention, of the way he watched her throat when she swallowed. The food was rich, seasoned with herbs she'd only smelled in passing. It sat heavy in her stomach, at war with the suppressants. Tell me about the North, he said finally. So she did, weaving truth with fiction. She spoke of endless winters and aurora-painted skies, of wolves that grew large as horses, and forests where the trees sang. She described the village that never existed, the parents she'd never known, the life she'd never lived. And all the while, he listened with an intensity that suggested he heard not just her words, but the lies beneath them. You're eloquent for someone raised in the wastes, he observed. Stories were all we had, Your Majesty. We became good at telling them. And at living them, apparently. When the meal ended and she rose to clear the dishes, he caught her wrist, gentle this time, his thumb finding those same silver scars. Whatever you're hiding, he said quietly, whatever you're running from, you don't have to face it alone. The offer hung between them, tempting and terrifying. How desperately she wanted to collapse into that promise, to let someone else carry the weight that was crushing her. But she'd seen what happened to Omegas who trusted Alphas with their truth. They became possessions, breeding stock, their children raised as weapons for the kingdom. Thank you, Your Majesty, she managed, gently extracting her hand. But some battles can only be fought alone. She was at the door when his voice stopped her. Lyra. The false name again. Be careful who you trust. Not everyone offering help has pure intentions. Did he know about Morvithus? Was this warning or threat? She fled before she could find out. The concentrated suppressant was worse than poison. It was erasure. For 3 days after taking that single drop, Celara couldn't feel her wolf at all. Not suppressed, not sleeping, but gone, as if it had never existed. The silence in her mind was deafening. But it worked. Even Lady Valora, with her suspicious nose and predator's instinct, walked past her in the corridors without a second glance. She had become truly invisible, truly nobody. The freedom should have been liberating. Instead, it felt like death. "You look pale," observed Maris, the head cook, as Celara prepared the morning bread. "Paler than usual." "The winter affects me," Celara replied, kneading dough with mechanical precision. Her hands no longer trembled, another effect of the suppressant. No wolf meant no nervous energy, no instinctive reactions, no humanity beyond the shell of flesh. "The king's been asking about you," Maris continued, lowering her voice. "Every morning. 'Where is the servant Lyra?' he asks. 'What duties has she been assigned?' Strange interest for a servant girl. Strange interest that could destroy everything. But without her omega scent, surely his attention would fade. Alphas were drawn to omegas by nature, not choice. Remove the nature, remove the draw. She was wrong. That evening, as she delivered linens to the guest wing, she found him waiting in the corridor, not coincidentally passing by, not there on other business, deliberately waiting, arms crossed, silver eyes focused on her approach. "Your Majesty." She dropped into a curtsy, balancing the linens. "Walk with me?" It wasn't a request. He turned and strode down the corridor, clearly expecting her to follow. She had no choice but to comply, trailing him through passages she'd never seen before, deeper into the royal wing where servants rarely ventured. He led her to a balcony overlooking the training grounds, where young alphas sparred under moonlight. The sound of clashing steel drifted up, punctuated by grunts of effort. Among the trainers, she spotted Lord Dravener barking orders, his methods harsh even from a distance. "Do you know what makes a strong alpha?" Kaloran asked, gaze fixed on the fighters below. "Power, Your Majesty? Control." He turned to face her, and even without her wolf, something in her recognized the predator before her. Power without control is just destruction, but control without understanding is tyranny. Lord Dravenor believes in power. I believe in control. Was this a lesson or a warning? With Kaloran, she could never tell. "I've been investigating the traitor in my court," he continued, "following gold trails, message patterns, suspicious meetings. Do you know what I've found?" Her heart raced. Did he know about Morvethus's offer? About the journal he wanted stolen? "Nothing," Kaloran said, frustration bleeding into his voice. "Every lead vanishes like smoke. Someone is very clever, very careful, or very protected. Perhaps all three, Your Majesty." He studied her with those unsettling eyes. "Tell me, Lyra, if you wanted to hide something in plain sight, how would you do it?" The question was too pointed to be casual. "I suppose I'd make it look like something else entirely. Hide the extraordinary in the ordinary. Like hiding a wolf in servant's clothing?" The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Did he know? Was he toying with her, waiting for a confession? I wouldn't know about that, Your Majesty. Wouldn't you? He moved closer, and despite the suppressant killing her wolf, her body responded, heart racing, breath catching. You've been here exactly as long as certain irregularities began. No servant is that perfect unless they're hiding something. Perhaps I'm simply dedicated, Your Majesty. Or perhaps you're terrified. His voice dropped, becoming almost gentle. What are you afraid of, Lyra? What could be so terrible that you'd rather live this half-life than face it? Everything. Losing control. Being claimed. Becoming another Omega broodmare for the kingdom's breeding programs. Watching any children she bore be taken, raised as weapons. The same fate that had befallen her mother, her aunts, every Omega in her bloodline until she'd run. Everyone fears something, Your Majesty. Even kings? Especially kings. They have the most to lose. A smile ghosted across his lips, there and gone. Wise words for a northern orphan. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed from the main corridor. Lord Morvethus appeared, his pale robes seeming to float in the moonlight. His eyes found hers immediately, a silent reminder of their bargain. Your Majesty, he bowed smoothly. The Council awaits your decision on the Warland treaties. The Council can wait, Kay Lorne replied, not breaking eye contact with Silera. Of course, but the Warland ambassador grows restless. He speaks of insults and broken promises. War, even. The threat was cleverly delivered, not from Morvethus, but through him, forcing Kaloran to choose between kingdom and curiosity. The king's jaw tightened. 5 minutes, he told Morvethus, then turned back to Silara. We'll continue this another time. After he left, Morvethus lingered, his smile sharp as winter wind. Tomorrow night, he said simply. The journal. North Tower. Midnight. And if I refuse, then by week's end, the king will receive fascinating information about an Omega who's been hiding in his palace, complete with documentation of the suppressant purchases, the blood ritual sites, even the false identity papers. I've been tracking you for months, little wolf. Did you think your arrival here was coincidence? The revelation hit like ice water. He'd known all along, had been waiting, watching, gathering evidence. Why now? She managed. Because now I need something only an Omega can retrieve. And you, my dear, are perfectly positioned. His smile widened. Tomorrow night. Don't disappoint me. That night, she lay awake planning. The king's private study was in the North Tower, 3 floors above the throne room. Guards at every entrance, magical wards on the windows, and according to rumor, a dire wolf that slept before the door. Impossible for a servant to infiltrate, but not impossible for someone who knew the palace's hidden passages, the ones she'd discovered during endless midnight wanderings, trying to exhaust herself enough to sleep through the Omega dreams. At midnight, she slipped from her quarters wearing the darkest clothes she owned. The concentrated suppressant made her movements feel strange, disconnected, as if she were puppeting her own body. But it also meant no scent to track, no wolf's presence to detect. She was a ghost. The passage behind the kitchen stores led up through the walls, a maintenance shaft for the old heating system. Abandoned now, but still intact. She climbed in darkness, counting handholds, until she reached the level of the king's study. Through a ventilation grate, she could see the room, shelves lined with ancient texts, maps covering every surface, and there, on the central desk, a white leather journal that seemed to pulse with its own light. Beside it, she noticed, lay reports bearing Lord Dravenor's seal. The study appeared empty, but she waited, counting heartbeats. Nothing. Even the dire wolf must be patrolling elsewhere. She eased the grate open, dropping silently onto thick carpet. The journal drew her forward, its cover unmarked but somehow familiar. As her fingers closed around it, she understood why Morvethis needed an Omega. The journal burned with alpha magic, the kind that would sear any beta or lesser wolf who touched it. But Omegas were made to withstand alpha power, to complement and contain it. Even with her wolf suppressed, her body remembered its nature. She tucked the journal inside her shirt, its heat warming her chest, and turned to leave. "I wondered when you'd come." Cailerin stood in the doorway, fully dressed despite the hour, as if he'd been waiting. His eyes weren't angry or surprised. They were disappointed. "Your Majesty, I don't." He entered slowly, closing the door behind him. "At least do me the courtesy of not lying. You're here for the journal. Morvethis sent you." How did he know? Unless you knew, she breathed. You knew he would approach me, knew he would send me here. I suspected. The journal is bait, Lyra. Or should I call you something else? Your real name, perhaps? Terror spiked through her. I don't know what you mean. The journal you're holding contains the genealogies of every Omega bloodline in Drakmor. Hidden Omegas, specifically. The ones who escaped registration, who've been living under false identities. He moved closer, and she backed against the desk. I had it created to draw out the traitor. Someone's been selling Omega locations to the Warlands. 3 have disappeared this month alone. Selling Omegas. The thought made her sick. The Warlands didn't have breeding programs. They had fighting pits, where Omegas were forced to battle for entertainment. I wouldn't. I know. His certainty stopped her cold. You're not the traitor, Lyra, but Morvethis thinks you are. He thinks you're an Omega hiding from the crown, that you'd do anything to keep that secret. He's using you to steal what he thinks is a list of unregistered Omegas he can sell. But you said it's about genealogies? It is. Your genealogy, specifically. He reached past her, taking the journal from her nerveless fingers. Opening it, he showed her a page covered in names, bloodlines traced through generations. At the bottom, freshly inked, Selara Moonweaver, last of the celestial Omega line. Her real name, her true heritage, written in the Alpha King's own hand. How? The word came out strangled. Your blood! He gestured to her scarred wrists. The silver in your scars comes from moon-blessed heritage. Only 3 bloodlines carry that mark. 2 are accounted for. The 3rd disappeared when the Moonweaver pack was destroyed. A young Omega named Solara vanished the same night. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her carefully constructed lies, undone by the very scars meant to maintain her disguise. You've known. This whole time, you've known. I suspected. Your arrival at the palace, your perfect service record, your violent illness every full moon, patterns too convenient to be coincidence. But I needed proof. Why didn't you... She couldn't finish. Why didn't he expose her, claim her, drag her to the breeding programs? Because someone in my court is hunting omegas. Until I knew who, revealing your identity would have painted a target on your back. His eyes softened slightly. You were safer as Lyra the servant than Solara the Omega. But now Morvethys has revealed himself. He'll be arrested tonight, his network dismantled. The Omega trafficking ends now. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by new terror. But that means your time as Lyra is over. He set the journal aside, his full attention on her. I know what you think of the breeding programs. I know why you ran, but things have changed since you disappeared. Had they? Or was this another trap, another cage wrapped in prettier words? The programs were my father's creation, he continued. When I took the throne 5 years ago, I began reforming them. Omegas now choose their mates, choose when to have children, choose how to raise them. It's not perfect, but it's improving. And if I choose no mate, choose no children? Something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment? Understanding? Then that choice is yours. But Solara, you're dying. The words hit like physical blows. What? The suppressants. I can smell them on you, not the regular ones, something stronger, darker. Whatever Morvethys gave you, it's not just suppressing your wolf, it's killing it. And when a wolf dies, the human followed. She knew this, had seen it happen to others who'd tried to deny their nature too long. But she thought she had time, thought she could find a solution. How long? She whispered. With what you've taken? Weeks, maybe less. Weeks. The word echoed in Solara's mind as she stood frozen in the king's study. After surviving so long, she had weeks. There might be a cure, Kaloran said carefully, but it would require accepting your nature fully and completely. No more suppressants, no more hiding. You'd have to become who you truly are. An Omega! Solara Moonweaver, last of the celestial line, whose bloodline carries the blessing of the moon goddess herself. He moved closer, and this time she didn't retreat. You're not just any Omega. You're the Omega whose existence could change everything. Before she could ask what he meant, alarms began ringing throughout the palace. Shouts echoed from below, the clash of steel on steel. Kaloran cursed, moving to the window. Morvethys knew it was a trap. He's moving against us now. Us! He turned back to her, and in his eyes she saw not the Alpha King, but something rawer, more desperate. Make your choice, Solara. Stand with me as who you truly are, or run as Lyra and die in the shadows. But choose now, because in minutes, Morvethys' forces will be here, and they're not coming to negotiate. The journal lay between them, glowing with soft light. Her false life as a servant, or her true death as an Omega. Years of running had led to this moment, this choice. From below came the sound of battle, growing closer. Time was up. The choice was made in heartbeats, but it would echo for eternity. Solara grabbed the journal, its white leather burning against her palms, and spoke the words that shattered her silence. I am Solara Moonweaver, and I choose to fight. The moment her true name left her lips, something shifted. The concentrated suppressant in her veins began to burn differently, not the killing fire of before, but something that felt like transformation. Kay Lauren's eyes widened, silver bleeding into gold, as his wolf recognized what she'd just done. "You're breaking the suppressant's hold," he breathed. "That's impossible." "My bloodline was blessed by the moon goddess," she said, her voice growing stronger. "We were meant to be bridges between wolf and human, omega and alpha. The suppressant could hide me, even hurt me, but it couldn't destroy what I am." An explosion rocked the tower, stone dust raining from the ceiling. Morvethus's forces had breached the outer defenses. "Can you shift?" Kay Lauren demanded, already pulling weapons from a hidden cabinet. "I haven't shifted in years." "That's not what I asked." Could she? Her wolf had been silent so long, caged by chemicals and fear. But now, with death approaching and truth finally spoken, she felt it stirring. Not dead, not gone, waiting. "I can try." He pressed a blade into her hand, its weight familiar despite years of disuse. "If you are who you claim to be, your wolf will be white as moon snow with silver eyes, the mark of your bloodline. And if I'm not? Then we'll die together, and at least you'll die free." Another explosion, closer this time. Through the window, she could see figures scaling the tower walls. Not regular soldiers, but something else. Their movements were wrong, too fluid, too synchronized. "Blood slaves!" Kay Lauren spat. "Morvethus has been using omega blood to create puppet soldiers." Rage flooded through her, pure, cleansing rage at what had been done to her kind. The suppressant cracked further, her wolf slamming against its weakening cage. The door splintered, and they poured in. A dozen blood slaves with empty eyes and deadly precision. Kailarine met them head-on, a blur of lethal grace, but there were too many. One slipped past him, reaching for Silara with grasping hands. She raised the blade instinctively, muscle memory from a leaf she'd abandoned guiding the strike. The slave fell, dark blood pooling, and she felt nothing but grim satisfaction. "Behind you!" Kay Lauren's warning came almost too late. She spun, catching another attacker across the throat, but a third grabbed her from behind. His hands were ice cold, inhuman, squeezing until stars exploded across her vision. She would not die here. Not like this. Not when she'd finally chosen to live. The suppressant shattered. Her wolf exploded free with accumulated fury, the shift taking her mid-struggle. Bones cracked, reformed, muscle and sinew reconfiguring in seconds rather than the minutes it should have taken. When it ended, she stood on 4 legs, her fur exactly as Kailarine had described, white as fresh snow with threads of silver that caught the light like stars. The blood slave holding her stumbled back in shock. She didn't give him time to recover, her jaws finding his throat with predator precision. "Magnificent," Kay Lauren breathed. And then he too was shifting, his wolf massive and midnight black, eyes like molten gold. Together they fought, 2 wolves against impossible odds, moving in perfect synchronization as if they'd trained together for years. Where he struck, she defended. Where she fainted, he attacked. The blood slaves, for all their unnatural strength, couldn't match the fury of an alpha and omega fighting as one. When the last body fell, They stood panting in the ruins of the study. Silara shifted back first, gasping at the sensation of being truly herself for the first time in years. Kaloran followed, his eyes never leaving hers. "Your wolf," he said roughly. "It's even more beautiful than the legends claimed." Before she could respond, slow clapping echoed from the doorway. Morvathus stood there, unharmed despite the battle raging through the palace. His pale eyes gleamed with satisfaction rather than defeat. Behind him, she glimpsed Lord Dravenor with a contingent of guards, but whose side were they on? "The lost Moonweaver princess reveals herself at last," Morvathus said smoothly, "and pair-bonded to the Alpha King, no less. How romantic." "Pair-bonded?" Silara's voice cracked. She looked at Kaloran, who had gone very still. "You didn't notice?" Morvathus laughed. "The synchronized fighting, the perfect harmony? You can only achieve that with a true mate bond. Congratulations, Your Majesties. You're mated." It couldn't be. She would have felt it, would have known, except she'd been suppressing her wolf for years, and the concentrated suppressant would have hidden even that connection until it broke. "Enough games," Kaloran snarled. "Your coup has failed, Morvathus." "My coup?" The trade minister smiled. "Oh, my dear king, you misunderstand. This was never a coup. It was an audition." "What are you talking about?" "The Warlands don't want to conquer Drakmor. They want something far more valuable, a breeding pair of the strongest bloodlines, an Alpha King and a Celestial Omega, bonded and fertile. You've just proven you're everything they hoped for." Ice flooded Silara's veins. "You were testing us." "The journal, the theft, the blood slaves, all to force you to reveal yourself, to push you together until the bond snapped into place." His smile widened. "The Warland Emperor will pay a fortune for you both. Enough to buy my own kingdom." "You'll have to take us first," Kaloran growled, already tensing to shift again. "Oh, I don't need to take you." Morvathus pulled out a vial, not suppressant, but something that glowed sickly green. "This is Omega Bane, concentrated from 1,000 moonflowers. One breath, and every Omega in a mile radius falls into heat so violent it can kill, including your precious mate." Silara's newly freed wolf recoiled. Heat was dangerous enough for a bonded Omega, but artificially induced heat could tear her apart from the inside. "You're bluffing," Kaloran said, but uncertainty colored his voice. "Am I?" Morvathus uncorked the vial, letting a single drop of vapor escape. The effect was immediate. Fire raced through Silara's veins, her Omega nature responding to the chemical trigger. Her knees buckled, only Kaloran's arm around her waist keeping her upright. This wasn't natural heat. It was agony, every cell in her body screaming. "Stop!" Kaloran roared. "Surrender!" Morvathus countered. "Or I pour the entire vial!" Through the haze of forced heat, Silara felt Kaloran's rage, his alpha instincts demanding he protect his mate. But she also felt something else. The bond between them, new and fragile, but real. And through that bond, she could sense his wolf's power. "Don't," she gasped, knowing he was about to agree to anything to save her. "The journal? Use the journal." His eyes widened in understanding. The white leather journal wasn't just genealogies. It was a repository of Omega bloodline magic, including protections against forced heat. But to access it, he'd have to let her go, leave her vulnerable. "Trust me," she whispered. He released her, diving for the journal as Morvethys shouted in rage. More vapor escaped the vial, and Silara screamed, her body convulsing as the heat tried to tear her apart. But she held on, drawing on years of enduring suppressant agony. Kaloran's hands flew over the journal's pages, finding what he needed. He spoke words in the old tongue, and silver light erupted from the book, wrapping around Silara like a shield. The artificial heat shattered against it, leaving her gasping but whole. "Impossible," Morvethys breathed. "You forgot something," Silara said, pushing herself to her feet. "Celestial Omegas weren't just blessed by the moon goddess. We were her warriors." Power flooded through her, not her wolf strength, but something older, tied to moonlight and starfire. It had been sleeping, suppressed along with everything else, but now it woke with vengeance. Light erupted from her skin, silver white and burning. Morvethys screamed, dropping the vial as the light seared him. The remaining Omega Bane evaporated harmlessly, destroyed by celestial fire. "You think Omegas are weak?" she said, advancing on him as he cowered. "Meant to be controlled, bred, sold, but we were never weak. We were balanced, the moon to the alpha sun, the calm to their storm. You perverted that balance, turned it into slavery." "Please," Morvethys begged. "Did any of the Omegas you sold beg? Did you listen?" She raised her hand, celestial fire gathering. "Silara!" Kaloran's voice, gentle but firm. "Don't let him make you into what he thinks you are. You're not a killer. I've killed tonight. In defense. This would be execution, and that's my responsibility as king." He touched her shoulder, and the celestial fire dimmed. "Let me carry this burden." She wanted to argue, wanted to end Morvethys herself, but the bond between them pulsed with his certainty, his need to protect her from this final darkness. "Together, then," she said. They acted as one. Her celestial light held Morvethys immobile while Kaloran's blade found his heart. The traitor fell, his last breath a curse that died unuttered. "Arrest Lord Dravenor as well!" Kaloran commanded the guards, who'd been watching in stunned silence. "His presence here with Morvethys confirms his involvement in the conspiracy." "You can't prove," Dravenor started. "I can," Silara interrupted, pointing to the documents on the king's desk. "His reports detail Omega locations, breeding potential, market values. He's been working with Morvethys all along." As the guards dragged both conspirators away, one dead, one protesting, Silara and Kaloran stood facing each other, finally processing what had happened. Mated, bonded. After years of hiding, she was tied to the very thing she'd run from, an Alpha King. "I won't force you," Kaloran said quietly. "Bond or not, you have a choice. The reforms I mentioned are real. You can live freely, with or without me. And if I choose with, then we rule together, equal partners. Your Omega status won't make you less, it will make us more." He gestured to the journal. "Your bloodline carries knowledge we've lost, power we need. The kingdom needs both of us." Through the window, dawn was breaking, years of darkness ending as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. I need time, she said, to understand what I am, what we are. Take all the time you need, but Lara? He smiled, and for the first time she saw not the Alpha King, but just Kailaran, scarred, tired, hopeful. Whatever you decide, I'm glad you're alive. Glad you're free. Freedom. After so long, she barely knew what to do with it. But as she stood in the ruins of his study, bond humming between them, celestial power flowing through her veins, she thought maybe, just maybe, she could learn. The week following Morvethus's death should have been a celebration. The Omega trafficking ring was dismantled, the blood slaves freed from their magical bonds, and peace negotiations with the warlands progressed after the Emperor learned his trade minister had been acting without authority. But for Solara, each day brought new challenges she hadn't anticipated. Being free meant being visible. The celestial Omega walks among us. Whispers followed her through palace corridors. The lost princess of Moonweaver, risen from the dead. She'd traded servant's gray for the deep blue robes of her station, but the fabric felt foreign against skin accustomed to rough wool. Nobles who'd ignored her for years now bowed deeply, their eyes holding curiosity, calculation, and in some cases, fear. They're afraid of you, Kailaran observed during one of their evening meetings. They'd established a routine, dinner in his study, discussing kingdom matters while carefully navigating the bond that pulled them together. They're afraid of what I represent, she corrected, setting down a report about Omega protection reforms. Proof that Omegas can hide among them, that we're not as controllable as they believed. Good. Fear breeds respect, and respect breeds change. Through their bond, she felt his satisfaction, not at her discomfort, but at the disruption her presence caused to old power structures. It should have been reassuring, but the bond itself was its own complication. Every emotion bled through if she wasn't careful. His frustration during council meetings, her anxiety when meeting with newly freed Omegas, their mutual attraction that sparked whenever they touched, all of it transmitted through the invisible thread connecting them. You're distressed, he said suddenly, proving her point. The healer from the lower district came to see me today, the Renya, the one I claimed treated me. She pulled out a sealed letter. She brought this, said she's been holding it for years, waiting for someone named Solara to claim it. Kailaran straightened. Who's it from? My mother. The words hung heavy between them. Her mother, who died when Sylara was 10, 3 years before she'd fled to hide in the palace. Her mother, who'd been claimed by an alpha who saw her as breeding stock, nothing more. Have you read it? I'm afraid to. She turned the letter over, recognizing the elegant script. What if it tells me I was wrong to run? Or worse, what if it tells me I was right? He moved around the desk, kneeling before her chair, the Alpha King, on his knees before an Omega. The gesture would have scandalized the court. Whatever it says, you're not alone in facing it. She broke the seal with trembling fingers. My dearest Solara, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and you've been forced to make the choice I always feared you would face. To run or submit, to hide or die. I pray you ran. I know what they say about Omegas who abandon their duty, who refuse their place in society's order. They call us selfish, broken, wrong. But my darling girl, you were born free, with starlight in your eyes and moonfire in your heart. No alpha has the right to cage that light, no matter what the law says. I couldn't run. By the time I understood what my life would become, I had your brothers to protect, bonds I couldn't break. But you have the strength I lacked. The celestial bloodline doesn't just carry power, it carries will. The will to choose, to fight, to be more than what others demand. Remember the old stories I told you about the corona of souls? It's real, my love. Hidden, waiting for a celestial omega brave enough to claim it. Find it, and you'll find your true power. If you're reading this in hiding, stay hidden. Live free, even if you must live alone. And if you're reading this because you've been discovered, remember, you are not property. You are not weak. You are the daughter of moon and stars, and no one, alpha, beta, or omega, can take that from you. All my love, Mother. Tears blurred her vision, dropping onto the parchment. Her mother had wanted her free, had blessed her choice to run, even from beyond death, and she'd left a clue, the corona of souls. She sounds like she would have changed the world, Kaloran said softly, if given the chance. She tried, in small ways, quiet rebellions, teaching Omega children to read when it was forbidden, hiding those who fled bad marriages, speaking in council when Omegas weren't supposed to have opinions. Solara wiped her eyes. They said she died of winter fever, but I always wondered. You think she was killed? I think she was inconvenient. The words came out harder than intended. An Omega who wouldn't submit quietly, who kept pushing for reforms. Either way, she died, and I ran rather than face the same fate. His anger flowed through their bond, not at her, but for her, for all Omegas who'd faced such choices. That won't happen here, he said fiercely. Not anymore. The reforms... Your reforms are words on paper. Beautiful words, but still just words. She stood, pacing to the window. Today alone, 3 alphas petitioned to overturn the new consent laws. They argued that Omega biology makes true consent impossible, that we're ruled by heat and instinct. The council rejected their petition by 2 votes. 2, Kaloran. Half your council believes I'm incapable of choosing my own breakfast, let alone my own life. He joined her at the window, careful not to touch. They'd learned that physical contact amplified the bond, making it harder to think clearly. Then we prove them wrong. You and I, together, showing them what equal partnership looks like. We're not equal. The truth hurt to speak. You're the Alpha King. I'm an Omega who hid for years. The only reason I have any standing is because of my bloodline and our bond. Then we make you more. He turned to face her. Marry me. The words landed like lightning. What? Not as Omega to Alpha, but as Queen to King. Full royal status, equal authority, your own seat on the council. It's the fastest way to... No. The rejection hit him through the bond, and she felt him flinch. But she couldn't apologize. Not for this. I won't be the Omega who married her way to power, she said, who needed an Alpha's name to be heard. That validates everything they believe about us. Then, what do you suggest? Before she could answer, the door burst open. A guard stumbled in, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. Your Majesty, he gasped. The Omega Sanctuary, It's under attack. They ran through the palace corridors, Kaloran shouting orders while Silara tried to make sense of the guard's fractured report. The sanctuary housed 40 Omegas who'd been rescued from trafficking, vulnerable, traumatized, still recovering from their ordeal. "Who's attacking?" Kaloran demanded. "We don't know, sire. They came from nowhere. No insignia, no demands. They're just taking them." Rage flooded the bond from both directions. Silara's celestial power stirred, eager for release. They arrived to find chaos. The sanctuary's gates were shattered, guards lying unconscious or worse. From inside came screams, the sound of battle, and something else, a high, keening note that made her Omega instincts recoil. Omega suppressant gas, she recognized. It'll paralyze any Omega who breathes it. "Then you stay here." "Like hell." She was already moving, celestial light wrapping around her like armor. "I survived years of suppressants. I can handle this." They entered together, finding a massacre in progress. Black-clad figures were dragging unconscious Omegas toward a waiting carriage, their movements efficient, practiced. This wasn't a random attack. It was a harvest. Kaloran shifted immediately, his massive black wolf tearing into the attackers. But Silara stayed human, needing hands to work the celestial magic. She pulled starlight from the air, weaving it into nets that trapped the kidnappers, into shields that protected the fallen Omegas. "Behind you!" An Omega girl, barely 16, pointed frantically. Silara spun to find 3 attackers converging on her. She raised her hand, celestial fire gathering, but nothing came. The suppressant gas was affecting her, not paralyzing but weakening, making it harder to grasp her power. One attacker reached her, hand closing on her throat. She glimpsed his face beneath the hood, scarred, familiar. She'd seen him before, in the palace, wearing servant's gray like her. "Did you think you were the only one hiding?" he hissed. "The only Omega who learned to fight back?" Understanding hit like cold water. These weren't alphas or betas hunting Omegas. They were Omegas, hunting their own kind. "Why?" she gasped. "Because suffering breeds strength," he said, "and strength sells for more than submission." He squeezed harder, spots dancing in her vision. Through the bond, she felt Kaloran's panic, his desperate fight to reach her through the crowd. Then the Omega girl, the one who'd warned her, did something impossible. She shifted. Omegas could have wolf forms. It was just rare, so rare most believed it impossible. But this girl transformed into a small silver wolf, all lean muscle and desperate courage, launching herself at Silara's attacker. The surprise broke his grip, and Silara gasped air, her power returning in a rush. She didn't hesitate, celestial fire erupting from every pore, sending the attackers flying. Around her, other Omegas were stirring, fighting back despite the gas, despite their fear. "They're not normal Omegas." Kaloran's voice reached her as he shifted back to human form. "They're like you, bloodline carriers." Of course, the traffickers hadn't been taking random Omegas. They'd been selecting those with dormant gifts, hidden power, untapped potential. Omegas who could be more than breeding stock, who could be weapons. The remaining attackers retreated, vanishing into the night with practiced ease. They'd failed to take anyone new, but the damage was done. The sanctuary was in ruins, its residents terrorized, and a new truth had been revealed. "There are others," Silara breathed, looking at the silver wolf who'd saved her. "Others like me, with power they've been hiding." The girl shifted back, naked and shivering. Silara wrapped her own cloak around the girl's shoulders. "My name is Elysia," the girl whispered. "I've been hiding what I am since I presented. They all have. Every Omega here has some gift they've suppressed, some power they're afraid to show. 40 Omegas with hidden abilities, all gathered in one place. It wasn't coincidence. Someone had been collecting them, protecting them. But who? I did." They turned to find Lady Valora, the Queen Mother, standing in the ruined doorway. Her usual severity had been replaced by something softer. Regret, perhaps, or hope. "You?" Kay Lauren sounded stunned. "You've been gathering gifted Omegas?" "For 20 years," she confirmed. "Ever since I learned the truth, that Omega weakness is a lie we've told for so long, we've forgotten it's false. They're not lesser. They're different. And difference terrifies those in power." "Why didn't you tell me?" Hurt colored Kay Lauren's voice. "Because you had to learn for yourself. Had to see what Omegas could be when given the chance." She looked at Silara. "You were my greatest hope and greatest fear. A celestial Omega with the power to change everything, if you survived long enough to claim it. You knew I was here, in the palace. All this time?" "I suspected, but you had to choose to reveal yourself. That choice, that will, that's what makes you dangerous to the old order." Valora smiled, sharp and proud. "And that's what will make you the weapon that destroys it." "Weapon!" The word should have been offensive, but Silara understood. Not a weapon wielded by others, but one that chose its own targets, its own battles. "The Corona of Souls," Silara said suddenly, remembering her mother's letter. "You know where it is." Valora's smile widened. "I've been its guardian for 20 years, waiting for the right Omega to claim it. It's time, Silara. Time to become what you were meant to be." The Omega training grounds were established in the palace's abandoned East Wing, where servants once whispered of ghosts and old magic. Now it hummed with a different kind of power. 43 Omegas learning to fight, to shift, to wield abilities they'd hidden their entire lives. Silara stood in the center of the main hall, watching Elysia teach a group of younger Omegas basic defensive stances. 3 weeks had passed since the sanctuary attack, and in that time, everything had changed. Word had spread through hidden networks. The celestial Omega was gathering those with gifts, teaching them to be more than victims. "Your stance is too narrow," Silara corrected gently, adjusting a boy's feet. "Omegas have a lower center of gravity than alphas. Use it." The boy, Theron, barely 14, nodded eagerly. His gift was unusual even among the unusual. He could sense emotions through touch, making him invaluable for detecting deception, but terrible at hand-to-hand combat. Lady Valora approached, carrying an ornate box that seemed to shimmer with inner light. "It's time," she said simply. They'd been preparing for this moment, the revelation of the Corona of Souls. Silara had spent weeks studying her mother's notes, understanding what the artifact truly was. Not just a crown, but a repository of collective Omega knowledge, passed down through generations of celestial queens. "Lady Solara!" a voice called from the doorway. One of the newer arrivals, an Omega named Caliph, who'd traveled from the western provinces, stood nervously at the entrance. "There's someone here to see you. Says she knows you from before." Before. The word carried weight among them. Before they ran, before they hid, before they learned to bury their true selves. Solara followed Caliph through the corridors, her celestial senses prickling with unease. In the receiving chamber stood a figure draped in traveling clothes, hood obscuring their features. But Solara didn't need to see the face. She recognized the stance, the way they held their shoulders despite years of trying to appear smaller. "Miralyn?" The hood fell back, revealing a face Solara hadn't seen in years. Her cousin, her childhood companion, the one who'd helped her escape the night everything fell apart. Miralyn had aged harder than her years should have allowed. Lines carved by suffering, eyes dulled by experiences Solara could only imagine. "Hello, cousin," Miralyn said, her voice carrying none of the warmth it once held. "Or should I say, Your Highness, the lost princess, risen from the dead?" The bitterness in her tone made Solara's chest tight. "Mira, you left." The words came out sharp, accusatory. "You ran and left us all behind. Do you know what happened to the Omegas in the Moonweaver pack after you disappeared?" Solara's throat constricted. She tried not to think about it, the cost of her freedom measured in others' suffering. "They were scattered," Miralyn continued. "Sold, claimed, bred like livestock. I spent years in a breeding facility before I managed to escape. Years, Solara, wondering if you were dead or just too much of a coward to come back." Each word was a knife, precisely aimed. The bond with Kailarin pulsed with his concern. He was in a council meeting but sensed her distress. She pushed reassurance back, needing to face this alone. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was 13, terrified. We were all terrified. But you had the bloodline, the power. You could have saved us, and instead, you saved yourself." The accusation hung between them. Years of resentment crystallized into a moment. How could Solara explain that she'd been too young, too broken by her mother's death to be anyone's savior? That survival had taken everything she had? "You're right," she said instead. "I ran. I hid. I survived when others didn't. I can't change that, but I'm trying to change what comes next." Miralyn laughed, bitter and hollow. "Change? You're mated to the Alpha King. You've traded one cage for a prettier one. That's not, isn't it? You think teaching a few Omegas to fight will change centuries of oppression? They're coming for you, Solara. All of you." Ice ran down Solara's spine. "Who's coming?" "The Syndicate." Miralyn pulled out a rolled parchment, tossing it onto the table between them. "The Omega traders who attacked the sanctuary? They're just the scouts. The real army is gathering in the Northlands. Hundreds of Omegas who've learned to weaponize their trauma, led by someone who makes Morvethus look like a kitten." Solara unrolled the parchment, finding a detailed map marked with positions, numbers, timestamps. Military intelligence of the highest order. "How do you know this?" "Because I've been with them for the past 2 years. Miralyn's confession landed like thunder. "I believed in their cause, Omegas taking power through strength rather than submission. But then I heard about you, what you're doing here, and I realized there might be another way. You're asking me to trust intelligence from someone who just admitted to being my enemy? I'm asking you to listen to someone who's seen what desperation does to our kind. Miralyn moved closer, and for the first time, Silara noticed the scars on her neck. Claiming marks, multiple sets, forcibly healed and reopened. The Syndicate doesn't want to free Omegas. They want to replace one system of oppression with another, where the strongest Omegas rule through fear. And their leader calls herself the Void Mother. She was like you once, a bloodline carrier with immense power, but 20 years of brutality broke something in her. Now she believes the only way Omegas survive is by becoming the monsters Alphas always said we were. Silara studied the map, her strategic mind already calculating defenses, contingencies. When? New moon? 2 weeks from now? They'll strike when lunar power is weakest, when celestial Omegas like you are most vulnerable. 2 weeks to prepare for war. 2 weeks to turn traumatized Omegas into warriors capable of defending themselves against their own kind. Why warn me? Silara asked. Why betray them? Because I saw what you did at the sanctuary. Marilyn's voice cracked slightly. You didn't just fight, you protected. You didn't just use your power, you shared it. Maybe that's naive, maybe it'll get you killed, but it's what Mother would have wanted. Their mothers had been sisters, both claimed too young, both dead too soon. The shared loss hung between them, a bridge across years of separation. Stay, Silara offered. Help us prepare. Your inside knowledge could save lives. The king will never trust me. Then it's fortunate I'm not asking the king. As if summoned, Kalorn appeared in the doorway, having abandoned his council meeting the moment Silara's distress peaked. His eyes immediately assessed the situation, the tension, the map, the stranger who looked enough like Silara to be family. Your Majesty, Miralyn said with mocking courtesy. Come to protect your Omega from her past? I've come to support my partner in whatever she decides, he replied evenly, though Silara felt his wolf suspicion. Miralyn has intelligence about an impending attack, Silara explained, sending him mental images of the map. The Syndicate, the Omega traders, they're planning something massive. He studied the intelligence with a warrior's eye. These positions, they're surrounding the palace. This isn't a raid, it's a siege. 500 Omegas with combat training and bloodline gifts, Miralyn confirmed. Plus, they're Alpha allies. Yes, they have those. Alphas who profit from the chaos, who've been promised positions of power in the new order. We need to evacuate the vulnerable, Kalorn said immediately. Move the young Omegas to the mountain strongholds. No. Silara's interruption surprised them both. We don't run. Not this time. Silara, be reasonable. We have maybe 40 Omegas with basic training against 500 experienced fighters. Then we even the odds. She turned to Lady Valora, who had been listening from the doorway. It's time to reveal the corona. Valora opened the ornate box she carried. Inside, cushioned in silver silk, lay a crown that seemed woven from starlight itself, delicate as spider silk but thrumming with ancient power. The corona of souls, hidden for generations, waiting for this moment. "This is more than a symbol," Valora explained as Silara lifted it reverently. "It's a conduit. Every celestial Omega who ever wore it left part of their knowledge, their power, their wisdom within. When you wear it, you don't stand alone. You stand with centuries of your foremothers." The moment the corona touched Silara's brow, the world exploded into light and memory. She saw them all, generations of celestial Omegas who'd fought, loved, suffered, and triumphed. She felt their collective strength flowing into her, not replacing her own power, but amplifying it exponentially. "By the moon!" Miralyn breathed, falling to her knees. Around the room, every Omega present felt it, the corona's awakening sending ripples of power through the air. "This changes the equation," Kaloran said, his tactical mind already recalculating. "With the corona's power—" "It's not enough," Silara interrupted, the crown's knowledge flooding her mind. "The corona amplifies existing power, but 40 against 500 is still impossible odds, unless ... She turned to Miralyn, an idea forming. The Syndicate Omegas, they're not evil, just desperate, traumatized. What if we don't fight them? What if we free them? "The Void Mother has them bound by blood oaths," Miralyn said. "Dark magic that the corona can break." Silara's eyes blazed with celestial light. "Not through force, but through choice. If we can reach them, remind them who they were before the trauma, before the Syndicate." "It's a massive risk," Kaloran warned. "If it fails..." "If it fails, we fall fighting for something better than survival." She looked at the gathered Omegas, saw hope kindling in their eyes. "We've hidden long enough. It's time to show the world what Omegas truly are." The corona pulsed on her brow, and she felt the approval of her ancestors. This was what they'd been waiting for. Not just another celestial Omega, but one brave enough to change the game entirely. The night before, the new moon arrived too quickly. 2 weeks of preparation had transformed the palace grounds into something between a fortress and a sanctuary. Omega defenders positioned at strategic points, each grouped according to their gifts. Healers with empaths, shadow walkers with flame wielders, creating combinations that multiplied their effectiveness. Xylera stood on the highest tower, the corona of souls gleaming on her brow as she surveyed their defenses. Beside her, Kaloran tracked the approaching forces through a spyglass. "They're not trying to hide," he observed. 500 Omegas moving in broad formation with alpha mercenaries on the flanks. They want us to see them coming. "The Void Mother wants to make a statement," Miralyn said from behind them. She'd proven invaluable these past 2 weeks, training defenders in Syndicate tactics. This isn't just about taking the palace. It's about proving that traumatized Omegas are stronger than free ones. "Then we'll prove her wrong," Silara said, though uncertainty gnawed at her. The plan was audacious, perhaps impossible. Instead of fighting, they would try to break the blood oaths binding the Syndicate Omegas, offering them freedom through the corona's power. "You should rest," Kaloran said quietly. "Tomorrow will demand everything you have." "I can't sleep." She turned from the window, meeting his concerned gaze. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them, 500 Omegas who've suffered like we have, forced to become weapons. What if I can't reach them? What if they're too far gone?" He pulled her close, their bond humming with shared emotion. Then we'll face that together. But Solara, what you're attempting, using the corona to touch 500 minds simultaneously, it could kill you. I know. She'd been honest with him about the risks. The corona's power was immense but not infinite. Channeling it to break that many blood oaths at once would drain her completely. But if it works, you'll have freed them all. He pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture more intimate than any kiss. Just promise me you won't sacrifice yourself. The kingdom needs you. I need you. Before she could respond, Theron burst onto the tower, his young face pale with terror. Lady Solara, Lord Cailerin, the Void Mother sent an emissary. She wants to meet. They found the emissary in the throne room, a hollow-eyed Omega woman bearing scars similar to Miralin's. She stood perfectly still, speaking in a monotone that suggested magical compulsion. The Void Mother offers terms, she recited. Single combat between herself and the Celestial Omega. If Solara wins, the Syndicate withdraws. If the Void Mother wins, all Omegas in the palace join the Syndicate willingly. Absolutely not, Cailerin said immediately. We don't negotiate with... I accept, Solara interrupted. The throne room erupted in protests. Cailerin's fury blazed across their bond, while Miralyn grabbed her arm desperately. You don't understand, Miralyn said urgently. The Void Mother was a celestial Omega. She has her own corona, corrupted by dark magic. In single combat, she'll destroy you. Perhaps, Solara said calmly. But if I refuse, we face a battle that will kill hundreds. This way, only one person risks death. Your death! Cailerin snarled. I won't allow... You won't allow? She turned on him, celestial fire flickering in her eyes. We've had this conversation before. You don't own me, bond or not. The hurt that flashed across his face made her immediately regret her words. But before she could apologize, the emissary spoke again. The Void Mother awaits your answer. Dawn, in the courtyard. Come alone, or the agreement is void. Tell her I'll be there, Solara said. After the emissary left, the throne room emptied until only Solara, Cailerin, and Miralyn remained. There's something you're not telling us, Cailerin said, his voice carefully controlled. You wouldn't accept this challenge without a plan. Solara touched the corona, feeling the wisdom of her ancestors. The Void Mother thinks this is about strength. Who's the more powerful Omega? But that's not what the corona teaches. Our power isn't in domination, but in connection. You're going to try to save her, Miralyn realized. Moon's mercy, Solara. She's beyond saving. Whatever she was died 20 years ago. Did it? Or is it just buried under 20 years of pain? Solara moved to the window, watching the Syndicate forces set up camp just beyond the palace walls. Every Omega down there chose the Syndicate because they thought it was their only option besides submission. What if we could show them a third path? And if the Void Mother kills you before you can try, then you'll have to finish what I started. She turned to face them both. The corona isn't just mine. It belongs to all Omegas. If I fall, another can claim it. Elysia, perhaps, or even you, Miralyn. I'm not a celestial Omega, Miralyn protested. Neither was the Void Mother, originally. The Corona chooses based on will, not just blood. She took Miralin's hands. Promise me, if I fall, you'll continue this work, not through violence but through healing. Marilyn nodded reluctantly, tears gathering in her eyes. And you? Silara turned to Kailaran. Promise me you won't interfere tomorrow, no matter what happens. You're asking me to watch you die? I'm asking you to trust me. She reached up, cupping his face. Trust that I know what I'm doing. Trust our bond. Trust that sometimes the greatest strength is in choosing not to fight. He caught her hands, holding them against his chest, where she could feel his heart racing. I trust you. But Silara, if you die tomorrow, then at least I'll die free, she said simply, which is more than I could say 8 years ago when I first came here. That night, they didn't sleep. Instead, they sat together in his study, not talking, just existing in each other's presence. Through their bond, she felt his fear, his rage at his own helplessness, his desperate love. She sent back her own emotions, determination, hope, and yes, love too. Whatever tomorrow brought, she wanted him to know that she'd chosen him just as much as he'd chosen her. As dawn approached, she stood to prepare. The Corona required special rituals before battle, cleansing ceremonies that would maximize its power. But before she left, Kailaran caught her hand. Whatever happens, he said roughly, know that you changed everything, not just for Omegas, but for me. You taught me that strength isn't about domination, but about lifting others up. She kissed him then, pouring everything she couldn't say into that single contact. When they parted, both knew it might be goodbye. The courtyard was packed when she arrived. Every Omega in the palace had gathered, along with most of the servants and guards. The syndicate forces ringed the outer walls, hundreds of faces watching through the gates. And in the center of it all stood the Void Mother. Marilyn had been right. She wore a crown similar to the Corona of Souls. But where Silara's gleamed silver white, the Void Mother's was black as midnight, pulsing with veins of sickly green light. Her face was hidden beneath a hood, but power radiated from her in waves that made even Alpha Guards step back. The last celestial Omega, the Void Mother said, her voice echoing with unnatural harmonics. Come to die like all the others. I've come to offer you something better than death. Silara replied, stepping into the circle. Redemption. The Void. Mother laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Redemption? I've tortured Omegas, sold them, broken them into weapons. There is no redemption for someone like me. There's always redemption for those brave enough to seek it. Brave? The Void. Mother lowered her hood, and gasps echoed through the courtyard. Her face was a ruin of scars, each one glowing with that same sickly light. But worse were her eyes, empty voids where irises should be, darkness so complete it seemed to swallow light itself. I was brave once, she continued, brave enough to claim a Corona without the proper bloodline. Brave enough to believe I could change things through force. Look what bravery earned me. It earned you pain? Silara acknowledged. But pain doesn't have to be the end of your story. Enough talk. The Void Mother raised her hand, dark energy gathering. Let's end this. The first attack came faster than thought. tendrils of shadow aimed at Silara's heart. She dodged, celestial light flaring around her in a protective shield. But the Void Mother was already moving, striking from 3 directions at once. The battle was unlike anything Silara had trained for. The Void Mother didn't fight like an Omega, or even like an Alpha. She fought like trauma-given form, every attack designed to cause maximum pain rather than clean death. But as they fought, Silara began to understand something. The Void Mother's attacks followed patterns. The same patterns Silara recognized from her own nightmares, her own trauma. This wasn't just a battle. It was a woman fighting her own demons, projected outward. "I know what they did to you," Silara said, dodging another shadow blade. "The breeding facility, the forced bonds, the children they took." "The Void," Mother faltered. "You know nothing." "I know because I've felt it too. Through the corona, I feel what every Omega has suffered." Silara stopped dodging, standing firm. "Your name was Lirelei. You had 3 daughters. They took them all." "Stop!" "You tried to get them back. That's why you claimed the corona without preparation. Not for power, but for your children." The Void. Mother's next attack went wide, her concentration shattered. "They're dead, all dead. I couldn't save them." "But you can save these," Silara gestured to the watching Omegas. "All of them, your syndicate and mine. You can give them what your daughters never had, a chance to be free." "Freedom!" The Void Mother's laugh was broken, bitter. "I offered them freedom. Freedom through strength, through fear, through becoming what the Alphas feared we could be." "That's not freedom," Silara said gently, taking a step closer despite the danger. "That's just another cage, built from trauma instead of laws." Around them, the watching crowds held their breath. Through the corona, Silara could feel every Omega present. The palace defenders hopeful but frightened. The syndicate forces bound by blood oaths but stirring with something else. Recognition, memory, the possibility of something different. "You think your way is better?" The Void Mother gestured to the palace, to Kaloran watching from the walls. "Mated to an Alpha King, playing at equality while wearing his collar?" "I wear no collar." Silara touched the bond she shared with Kaloran, letting it pulse with warmth. "This bond was chosen, not forced. And yes, I think my way is better. Not perfect, but better, because it's built on healing, not hurting." The Void Mother raised her corrupted corona, dark energy pulsing. "Pretty words won't save you when the world comes to crush you. Only power matters, only strength." "Then let me show you a different kind of strength." Silara did something that made everyone, including Kaloran, cry out in alarm. She dropped her defensive shields entirely, leaving herself completely vulnerable. But more than that, she opened the corona's power, not as a weapon, but as a bridge. "What are you—" the Void Mother started. Then the connection hit. Through the corona of souls, Silara projected not an attack, but an invitation. She showed the Void Mother everything, her own trauma, her years of hiding, the pain of suppressance, the fear of discovery, but also the joy of finding herself, the warmth of chosen bonds, the strength found in lifting others up. More than that, she opened the connection to every Omega present. Palace defenders and syndicate forces alike suddenly felt each other, not as enemies, but as survivors of the same system. They felt Theron's gentle empathy, Elysia's protective courage, Miralin's hard-won wisdom. They felt the Syndicate Omega's pain, but also their desperate hope. The Void Mother staggered, her corrupted corona flaring erratically. "Stop! You don't understand what you're doing." "I'm showing them they're not alone," Silara said, tears streaming down her face from the strain. "None of us are alone." Through the mass connection, something extraordinary happened. The blood oaths binding the Syndicate Omegas, magic built on isolation and fear, began to crack. Not through force, but through simple connection. How could the oaths claim they were alone when they could feel hundreds of others who'd survived the same horrors? One Syndicate Omega dropped her weapon, tears streaming. Then another, and another. Like dominoes, they began falling to their knees, not in submission, but in release. The blood oaths shattered like glass, dark magic dissipating into morning light. "No!" The Void Mother's scream was primal, desperate. "They're mine! I saved them! I made them strong!" "You made them weapons!" Silara corrected, walking closer despite the dark energy writhing around the Void Mother. "But they were always more than that." The Void Mother lashed out, shadows given form striking at Silara. But the attack went through her without harm. The corona of souls blazed on her brow, and suddenly the Void Mother understood. "You're not fully here," she breathed. "You're spread across all of them. If I kill you now—" "You kill a body," Silara confirmed. "But what I am, what we are, lives on in every Omega touched by this connection. That's what you never understood, Lyrelay. Our strength isn't individual, it's collective." The Void Mother fell to her knees, her corrupted corona flickering. I just wanted them to stop hurting us." "I know." Silara knelt beside her, ignoring Kailarin's shout of alarm from the walls. "We all want that, but hurt plus hurt doesn't equal healing." She reached out, touching the Void Mother's corrupted corona. The moment her fingers made contact, pain exploded through her. 20 years of accumulated trauma, twisted magic, desperate rage. It should have destroyed her, but she wasn't facing it alone. Through the connection she'd opened, every Omega present shared the burden. Theron took some of the emotional pain. Elysia bore the physical agony. Miralin absorbed the memories of loss. Even the former Syndicate Omegas, freed from their oaths, voluntarily helped carry the weight. Together, they began to purify the corrupted corona. It wasn't easy. The Void Mother fought them at first, terrified of losing the power that had defined her for so long. But as the corruption peeled away, something else emerged. Starlight, faint but pure, hidden beneath layers of darkness. "Your daughters," Silara gasped through the shared pain. "They're not dead. I can feel them through your crown. 3 lights, distant but alive." The Void Mother, Lyrelay, went completely still. "That's impossible. I searched." "You searched with shadow and fear, but they're hidden in light and love." Through the purifying corona, images flashed. 3 young women bearing their mother's eyes, but not her scars, hidden in a distant sanctuary. "They think you're dead. They mourn you every day." Lyrelay broke then, 20 years of frozen grief melting into tears. The corrupted corona cracked, darkness bleeding away to reveal silver beneath. Not as pure as the corona of souls, marked by what it had endured, but clean. Around the courtyard, former Syndicate Omegas embraced palace defenders. Alpha guards lowered their weapons, recognizing the battle was over, and on the walls, Kaloran's relief flooded through the bond so strongly that Silara gasped. "Rise, Lyrelay Star Whisper," Silara said formally, helping the older woman stand. "Not as the Void Mother, but as yourself. Scarred, but healing. Broken, but rebuilding." "They'll never forgive me," Lyrelay whispered, looking at the Omegas she'd traumatized. "What I did was born from trauma," Miralyn interrupted, stepping forward. She'd been one of Lyrelay's victims, but her voice held no hatred. "We all did terrible things to survive. The question is what we do now." "Now," Silara said, addressing everyone present, "we build something new. Not the old system where Omegas were property, not the Syndicate where they were weapons, but something else, something better." "The Council will never accept this," one of the Alpha guards called out. 500 former Syndicate Omegas in the capital. "Then the Council will adapt," Kaloran said, finally descending from the walls. His presence commanded attention, every inch the Alpha King. "Because what I witnessed today proves what I've suspected for years. The strength of our kingdom doesn't come from Alphas dominating Omegas, but from all of us working together." He stood beside Silara, their bond humming with pride and love. "The old laws are hereby dissolved. No more breeding programs, no more registration, no more classification by designation. From this moment forward, every wolf in Drakmor is free to choose their own path." The cheers that erupted shook the palace walls, but Silara barely heard them. The strain of maintaining the mass connection, of purifying Lyrelay's corona, had drained her completely. She swayed, and only Kaloran's arms kept her upright. "I've got you," he murmured. "You incredible, impossible, magnificent woman. You did it." "We did it," she corrected weakly. "All of us." As consciousness faded, she felt the corona of souls pulse one last time. Its work was done. The knowledge it contained had been shared, the connections forged, the path forward revealed. It began to dissolve, not destroyed, but transformed, its essence spreading among all the Omegas it had touched. "No," she tried to protest. "We still need—" "You don't need a crown to be royal," Lady Valora said, appearing beside them. "You've proven that power comes from within, from connection, from choosing to lift others rather than stand above them." The last thing Silara saw before darkness claimed her was light. Silver and gold mingling as hundreds of Omegas manifested their gifts freely for the first time. Shadow and flame, healing and empathy, all dancing together in harmony. They'd won, not through violence, but through something far more powerful. Connection. 5 years later. The Festival of Unity had replaced the old harvest celebrations, marking not the gathering of crops, but the gathering of formerly scattered wolves into one society. The palace grounds, once segregated by designation, now hosted a magnificent integration of all. Alphas, betas, and omegas mingling freely, their children playing together without thought to future classifications. Silara stood on the same balcony where Kaloran had first taken her that night so long ago, watching the celebrations below. But now, Instead of young alphas training in isolation, she saw mixed groups learning from each other. Omegas teaching empathy and emotional control, alphas sharing physical techniques, betas bridging both worlds with their unique perspectives. "Mama, look what I can do!" She turned to find her daughter, 4-year-old Celestia, concentrating intensely. The child's face scrunched with effort before a tiny spark of celestial light appeared between her palms. Not inherited from bloodline alone, but nurtured through the new education system that helped all children discover their gifts. "Beautiful, my star," Silara praised, scooping her up. "Remember what we practice? Power is for helping, not hurting." Celestia recited seriously, "And everyone has power, just different kinds." "Exactly right." "She's been practicing all morning," Kaelorin said, joining them with their son, Darren. At 6, the boy had already presented as an Omega, surprising those who still clung to old beliefs about alpha bloodlines. But in the new Drakmor, it wasn't a limitation, but simply another path. "Uncle Theron is teaching me to sense emotions," Darren announced proudly. "He says I'm really good at it." Theron had become the kingdom's first Omega counselor, a position created to help traumatized wolves heal through empathic connection. His gentle nature, once seen as weakness, was now recognized as vital strength. "Your Majesties!" a familiar voice called. They turned to find Miralyn approaching, but she wasn't alone. Beside her walked Lyrelai, the former Void Mother, though she looked nothing like the creature of shadow she'd once been. 5 years of healing had softened the harsh lines of her face. Her scars remained, they always would, but they no longer glowed with corrupted magic. Instead, they'd become silver tracings that caught the light, beautiful in their own way. Most importantly, her eyes had returned, not the void of before, but warm brown, full of life. "How are the preparations?" Silara asked. "Complete," Lyrelai replied. 300 former syndicate members ready for placement in apprenticeships across the kingdom. They're nervous, but hopeful. Lyrelai had become instrumental in rehabilitating former syndicate Omegas, understanding their trauma in ways others couldn't. Her daughters had been found and reunited with her, though that healing journey continued daily. "And the council?" Kaelorin asked. "Still grumbling," Miralyn said with a smirk. "Lord Brennan particularly dislikes that Omegas now hold equal seats, but they can't argue with the results. Crime down, productivity up, and our trade partnerships stronger than ever since other kingdoms started adopting our reforms." It hadn't been easy. The first year had seen 3 attempted counter-revolutions, bitter political battles, and moments when everything nearly collapsed. But each challenge had been met not with force, but with patient demonstration of the new way's superiority. "Lady Silara!" Elysia's voice rang out from below. The young woman had grown into her power magnificently, leading what they now called the Silver Guard, a mixed designation protective force that had replaced the old Alpha-only guards. "What is it?" Silara called down. "Visitors from the Eastern Kingdoms. They're asking for an audience. Something about wanting to study our integration methods. Another kingdom ready to change." They'd been coming more frequently lately, drawn by stories of Drakmor's transformation. Not through conquest, but through example, the revolution was spreading. "We'll receive them shortly," Silara said, then turned to her family. But first, there's something we need to discuss. She'd been waiting for the right moment, and with the festival's joy surrounding them, it felt appropriate. "I'm pregnant," she announced simply. The reactions were immediate and varied. Kaelorn's joy blazed through their bond before he swept her into a careful embrace. The children erupted in excited chatter about a new sibling, but it was Lirali's response that surprised her most. Tears. "Another celestial Omega born into freedom," the older woman whispered. "Born into a world where they'll never have to hide what they are." "We don't know if the baby will be Omega," Silara pointed out. "Doesn't matter," Myralyn said firmly. "Alpha, Beta, or Omega, they'll be born free to choose their own path." As they stood together, this unlikely family forged from trauma and triumph, a commotion arose from the festival below. But this time, it wasn't alarm but celebration. Someone had announced the pregnancy. News traveled fast in the palace, and the crowd had burst into spontaneous celebration. Silara looked down at the sea of faces, former servants and nobles, reformed syndicate members and palace guards, all cheering together. Among them, she spotted familiar faces. Terenia, the old healer who'd helped so many hide, now honored as a national hero. Theron, surrounded by young empaths he was training, former breeding facility survivors, now living freely with chosen partners or alone as they preferred. "Do you ever regret it?" Kaelorn asked quietly. "The life you could have had if you'd kept running?" "How could I regret this?" She gestured to the celebration, to their children, to the transformed kingdom. "Yes, I lived as a servant for 7 years. Yes, I hid and suffered and nearly died from suppressants. But every moment led to this." "Even the pain?" "Especially the pain. It taught me empathy. It showed me what needed changing. And it proved that Omegas aren't weak. We're survivors." A knock at the door interrupted them. A young page entered, bearing a letter sealed with unfamiliar marks. "From the Warlands, your majesties," the page said nervously. "Their emperor requests a summit to discuss peaceful integration of Omega rights." Even the Warlands, where Omegas had been forced to fight for entertainment, were considering change. The revolution had spread farther than Silara had ever dreamed. "Schedule the summit," Kaelorn said. "But first, we celebrate." As evening fell, the festival reached its crescendo. Where once rigid hierarchies had determined who could dance with whom, now the courtyard swirled with mixed couples, alphas with omegas, betas with betas, some in 3s or 4s, all choosing freely. Silara and Kaelorn joined them, their children darting between dancers with laughing abandon. As they moved together, their bond hummed with contentment, not the desperate need of their early days, but the steady warmth of chosen partnership. "You know what I find most remarkable?" Kaelorn said as they danced. 8 years ago, you walked into my hall as a servant, terrified I'd discover what you were. Now you stand before the world as exactly who you are, and that authenticity has changed everything." "We changed everything," she corrected. "Your willingness to share power, to see Omegas as equals rather than possessions, that mattered just as much." "Partners," he agreed, spinning her. "In all things." As midnight approached, Silara stood before the assembled crowd for the traditional unity blessing. But instead of speaking alone, she invited others to join her: Lirali, Miralyn, Elysia, Theron, even Lady Valora. Together they spoke the words that had become Drakmore's new creed. We are not defined by our designation, but by our choices. We are not limited by our nature, but elevated by our connection. We stand not above or below, but beside each other. In unity, we find strength. In diversity, we find wisdom. In freedom, we find ourselves. The crowd repeated the words, hundreds of voices joining as one. As they spoke, something magical happened, not planned but spontaneous. Every Omega present began to manifest their gifts, creating a display of power that lit the night. Celestial light mingled with shadow. Flame danced with ice. Empathy and strength wove together invisible threads of connection. "Look!" little Celestia whispered in awe. "Everyone's glowing!" She was right. In that moment, every wolf present, Alpha, Beta, and Omega, shone with their own inner light. Not competing, but complementing, creating something beautiful in their diversity. As Solara stood surrounded by family, both blood and chosen, watching a kingdom transformed by the simple act of choosing connection over isolation, she thought of that frightened girl who'd first entered the palace 7 years ago. That girl who'd drunk suppressants like water, who'd hidden in servants' gray, who'd believed her only options were submission or solitude. That girl was gone, but not erased. She lived on in every Omega Solara helped find freedom, in every law changed, in every child born into choice rather than classification. The age of hiding was over. The age of becoming had begun. And in the palace where she'd once served in silence, Solara Moonweaver Shadowthorn stood free, no longer concealing her Omega nature, but celebrating it, alongside hundreds of others who'd found the courage to do the same. The revolution was complete. The real work of building a new world had just begun. But tonight, they danced. Tonight, they celebrated. Tonight, every wolf in Drakmore howled together, not in dominance or submission, but in joy. They were free.